What are we looking at in the Illustrator interface? Well, let's have a look. We've got a few tools up here. Selection tool, direct selection tool, and lasso and others. And each tool that we pass the pointer over has the name of the tool displayed in a pop-up with the shortcut key that you can press to bring that tool up. So if you want to teach yourself the shortcuts, force yourself to press them. Don't just click on the tool, hover over, and press the shortcut V instead. These tools are selection tools. These are object creation tools. These are object manipulation tools. We have a whole two sets of miscellaneous tools, and these ones generally change the view. Down below all of that, we have a fill and a stroke. Any object can have a fill and a stroke, and a couple of buttons to reset to defaults and to swap them. Note you can also click to bring the stroke up front or the fill up front. And you can also do that by pressing the shortcut X, as shown. Down below there's a few more options which affect drawing modes and send you into full screen mode, which can be quite a useful trick. So above the tools, we've got two bars along the top of the screen. We've got the application bar, and the most important thing in here is this, which lets you pick a new workspace. Workspaces affect the floating panels that are visible here on the right-hand side of the screen, and they can also affect other things as well. If you're not in Essentials already, it's probably a good idea to flick into Essentials, and also to reset Essentials in case you've been moving anything around, like I had. So as well as the floating panels, you've got this, the control panel along the top of the screen. And the control panel shows you relevant things to do with the currently selected tool or object on screen. It's very useful to know, but to be able to change things quickly without having to dip into all of these floating panels. It's not the only way to work, but it can be a really convenient way. The floating panels can exist in a few different states. They can either exist as purely icons, they can exist with names, which is useful until you know what the icons mean. You can just drag at the side to move out either way. They can also be expanded by pressing on the double arrows, and that's when you see the full width of a panel. If you only want to see a panel at a time, then you can access that when they're collapsed by clicking on its icon or clicking it again to hide it. But you'll probably want a few panels open all the time. Now, many of these panels have a lot more detail than is shown. For example, stroke down here is a lot more to it than just weight. If I double-click the word stroke, it will first get smaller, but then get much bigger. So the size will be juggled around between small and huge. And in fact, this is a lot more options than you usually see. Each of these panels has a submenu available in the top right corner. Right now I could choose to hide the options, so I'm not seeing much at all. But I could show the options, and that's how I can access the dashed lines and arrowheads and everything else down there. Any of these panels can also be dragged out either individually to make a floating panel, or indeed as whole groups by dragging the grey area to the right of all the panel names. You can drag them to float independently, you can drag them back into between other panel groups within the same column, and you can drag to add additional columns. This can be quite useful for things which need a fair bit of height, but which you don't need all the time. So you might drag layers to this second column, but then collapse it. And if you can't remember that that's layers, just expand it out a bit, and it still works in that context as well. It can also be resized in this mode. So once you've got a handle on how you want your panels to look, it's a good idea to save them by choosing New Workspace, and then giving it a name. I'm going to hit OK, and now it's going to remember a few changes that I've made, basically to put layers here. Normal changes that you make by moving these panels around, say if I want swatches out there, will be saved until I choose a different workspace from this menu, but it's always best to save them more permanently by choosing to make a new workspace. It's worth playing around to find what works for you. You may like to start from one of the presets, essentials, layout, painting, typography, things like that. And don't be afraid to chop and change. All of these are accessible and switchable at any time.